a friendly, neighborly manner. And for the next hour or so, although it probably will be less than that, I will be discussing with you the history of today's holiday. A happy Memorial Day to all of you. And I will be lecturing on the history of Memorial Day, Decoration Day, as it was called in its earliest days, where it came from, how it was inspired by America's most famous war, and how it has become a symbol of American celebration of people who have served in the armed forces, and particularly those who have given many sacrifices, including and especially the ultimate sacrifice of their lives in combat. So this is our live stream lecture for this weekend, this 3-day weekend. Hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 366 or 365 days a year. And today we are joining you on Memorial Day. Instead of doing our Sunday live stream lecture, we decided to save it for the holiday and embrace and celebrate that. So I hope you really enjoyed that. If you like history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing and becoming part of the Friendly Neighborhood Historian. We've got more than a legion going of Friendly Neighborhood Historians. So I think we're at up to 7,800 Friendly Neighborhood Historians, just a tick over that. So if you like history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing. We have live streams every Friday and Saturday where I answer all of your questions related to history and social studies at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then on Sundays at 4 is our live stream lecture. And this weekend we pushed it back because of a weekend and the Memorial Day. So we are celebrating Memorial Day and talking about the history of this incredible event. So if you enjoy social studies, the like, and learning about the past, you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing. Becoming a Friendly Neighborhood Historian is as easy as that. We are totally self-funded and have been doing this all pro bono. So if you are inclined to join and become a member of the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel here on YouTube, or join on Patreon and help contribute to us, we can use the funds as we continue to develop new technology and new ways of bringing you captivating history, no trademark, not the channel Captivating History, but bringing you interesting history to Friendly Neighborhood Historians. So consider joining, becoming a member, getting some perks, donating to the channel, and helping us grow and become an even bigger part of the YouTube community as we continue to push towards more and more monetization, more and more historians, and more historical content. So today is obviously Memorial Day. It occurs on the fourth Monday in May. It is relatively early this year, considering the fact that the first Monday in May was relatively earlier. Of course, we are talking about the Gregorian calendar established by Pope Gregory, and not the Julian calendar established by the Greeks in the 4th century AD. So fourth Monday of May has been the designation of Memorial Day for over 50 years now. For over 50 years, it has become one of the most beloved holidays in the American calendar, celebrating veterans, but especially those who risked and gave their lives, most often in the service of their country throughout the various different wars. And although it is a holiday, it might better be known as a commemoration for, well, many people have a day off from work and children are home from school. The holiday is steeped much more in the sadness and mourning of the loss of lost life than its counterpart, Veterans Day, which is celebrated in November. Memorial Day is not just another holiday like Veterans Day where people celebrate people who served. Memorial Day tends to imply the celebration and commemoration and remembrance of people who served and sacrificed their lives because of everything that had happened. So yeah, that's what's going on there. So we'll be on for, well, usually it's an hour, but I don't think I'll need an hour to talk about all of this. I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'll be answering some questions and everything, and we should be done around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then we will see you again on Friday at our usual 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything. Yes, we've got about 40 million Americans who have served in the front lines in combat roles, and millions of those have died in wars. The United States' biggest casualties came from the Civil War, the Second World War, the First World War, the Vietnam War. Those are some of the most significant wars that have led to the loss of large numbers of American lives, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, all of that through the years. So anyways, what is the story of Memorial Day, which is one of the most popular and well-known holidays? It obviously, for a lot of people, seems to signal the coming of summer, as it's the last spring holiday. The next major holiday, especially for the United States, is July 4th, which is more than a month away. But for many, children, especially teachers, people in education, this is where the locus starts to turn away from the school year. The school year is coming to an end, and students start getting excited, embracing this 3-day weekend as a foreshadowing of summer. So why do they get the day off? Why is Memorial Day a national federal holiday? Why is there no mail delivered? Why are the stock markets closed? Why is all of that happening here in the United States? Obviously, there are celebrations of troops and veterans all throughout the world. The most famous observance is Armistice Day, which celebrates the end of World War I, what you call World War I, what I consider to be World War II, that ended on November 11th, 1918, with the surrender of the Germans to the French, British, and United States forces, the Allies, as they were called, in the Second, or what you consider to be the First World War. And that it was Armistice Day, the ending of the fight, the truce that would eventually lead to the Treaty of Versailles, and the end of the first major world war of the 20th century. And that holiday later became Veterans Day, and it celebrates veterans, both past and present, who have served in their countries, and has become a holiday throughout much of the Western world as it looks back upon that war and the victory of the Allies. The British celebrate Veterans Day under a different name. I don't know when the British Memorial Day celebration is, but it is common for many countries in the Western canon to have their own celebration of soldiers who gave up their all and who passed away. And obviously, all the soldiers who died in war are technically veterans as well, so a celebration of them is implied in the celebration of Veterans Day in November here in the United States. But Memorial Day is not a counterpart, not a spring counterpart to Veterans Day. It is not a barometer for students to look forward to the summer, and it's not just a day that you can get a 3-day weekend off of work. Veterans Memorial Day is actually older than Veterans Day and has a much more American tinge in its history than Armistice, aka Veterans Day, which is celebrated by much of the Western world and the Europeans. Memorial Day. Memorial Day is celebrated, like I said, fourth Monday in May. And its origins is in America's greatest war, at least its greatest domestic war, that being the Civil War, where more soldiers died than in any other U.S. Affair. The U.S. side lost 300,000. The Confederacy lost about 300,000. So the total casualties of Americans comes out to about 600,000 men who have died in this horrifying war. The Battle of Gettysburg, for example, the largest battle in the war, saw 50,000 casualties in just 3 days. Almost the total amount, 58,000, were lost in the Vietnam War, which lasted nearly 20 years. So the United States suffered deeply and greatly in this horrifying total war known as the Civil War. And I could do an entire live stream lecture, and I certainly will, or I think I have, maybe not, about the history of the Civil War itself and what happened during those 4 years between 1861 and 1865. But the Civil War did breed the memorialization of dead soldiers, finding a place to properly bury those dead soldiers. Arlington Cemetery was created during the Civil War, as a matter of fact. And of course, the remembrance and lament over the loss of hundreds of thousands of men is obviously going to cause huge cultural shifts, a huge emotional and psychological scar on not just the people who lost family members, but also on the families that mourn them. And this led to the celebration known as Decoration Day, as a commemoration of those soldiers' loss, which eventually, a century later, would become Memorial Day. The Civil War started in 1861 mainly because the southern states, seven southern states had seceded: Alabama, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. 4 more would join much later, or soon afterwards, including Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and I'm trying to remember the last one. Did I mention Louisiana? I think Louisiana. Anyways, so 11 states would secede from the Union and form the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president, in protest to the election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican in the North, who was said to be, who was rumored by the Southerners to be demanding the end of slavery and would take away their slaves, destroying their economy, their society, and of course their ability to own human beings and produce forced labor in the South. This way of life in the antebellum South had become so entrenched that it would literally take a war to end not just the old Southern way, but to free the slaves. So the Civil War, despite starting off as a war between the northern states that remained in the Union and the southern states that left the Union, was really about the South wanting to preserve its way of life, particularly the practice of slavery, which they believed the election of President Abraham Lincoln endangered. This led to April 12, 1861, where Fort Sumter was attacked by the Confederates, Union Fort in South Carolina and Charleston Harbor, and the Union Army got in, and the war would start soon afterwards, with the Union Army having the advantages in many different facets of the war. But bloody and horrifying fighting occurred for the next 4 years. Eventually, the Union Army would pull ahead, especially thanks to the tactics of General Ulysses S. Grant, who would lead the Union Army to victory in 1865 and the surrender of General Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, which had fought valiantly to win for the Confederates. The Confederate system and economy collapsed, their political structure and government collapsed, and their leaders were rounded up and arrested. Many of their generals were arrested and later pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. However, in those 4 years, as I mentioned before, about 600,000 men would die or be wounded or captured or have other casualties. 600,000 casualties would occur, leading to a huge loss of life at many different battles like Antietam, Chancellorsville, and of course, as I mentioned before, Gettysburg. The need to bury these men and memorialize them properly gave rise to a movement among grieving widows and mothers who had lost their sons during this war to organize collections of flowers, goods, and services to bury their sons and to properly remember them, to gather in prayer and in lamentation and properly mourn those who were lost in the war. This effort continued throughout the war. It originally started in the Confederacy, but soon spread to the North as well, with Arlington National Cemetery being the first military cemetery to be created by the United States government in 1864, I think, or 1863. So, following that creation, the U.S. government, seeing the large loss of life because of the war and all of its horrifying effects on life and livelihood all throughout the entire nation, not just in the South, decided that it would be time to create a system of cemeteries for soldiers and those who had fought and served their country. This led to the National Cemetery Act in 1867, which the radical Republican Congress passed, basically dedicating certain plots and areas of land owned by the federal government to be graves and cemeteries for the dead who had died in the war. This led to the creation of military cemeteries, and Arlington, already being created, became the primary one that is still known to this day. A burial at Arlington Cemetery is considered to be one of the greatest advantages and honors a soldier or officer can receive for her or his country. So the need to bury and mourn and lament and properly celebrate the bravery of the men who were lost in the Civil War was the foundation and cornerstone and bedrock of what became known as Decoration Day. Although mothers and families have been celebrating, lamenting, and commemorating the sacrifices of their sons and family members for a long time, by the time 1867, 1868 rolls around, official celebrations are underway. General Logan Hayes is the first, or not General Logan Hayes, General Logan, I think was his last name, is the first general to actually host a national day of mourning and remembrance for the soldiers. These celebrations would continue for another century throughout the nation, sporadically and at different times, and his was also celebrated in May. So May was the time of year when it was first celebrated and these soldiers were commemorated. It made a lot of sense. The war had ended in April, and so it took time to organize, and usually a month after the anniversary of the war was when people would gather and properly celebrate and lament those who had died during the conflict. By the way, if you want to learn more about this, you can check out my long form video that I made. It's the first one I ever made from start to finish and published almost a year ago now for last Memorial Day. Started the tradition of me making long form videos for holidays, so please go check those out. I have long form videos dropping every Monday and Friday. This Monday, in honor of those soldiers, I will be posting that and you guys can watch that, and there will be a new long form video on Friday for you as well. So those are a few of the things there. So celebrations of Memorial Day would include the decorating and festooning of soldiers' graves with proper memorials, sometimes coins, things that would honor them, but garlands, wreaths, and flowers were tended to be, as they do to this day, to be the traditional way to celebrate and remember life that had been lost, especially in such horrifying circumstances as the Civil War, where hundreds of thousands of men had died and tens of thousands of men would die sometimes in a single day. The Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest battle of the war, had seen 19,000 casualties in one day, the single bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil in just one day. And of course, Gettysburg, you had 50,000 plus casualties over 3 days at about a rate of approximately 18,000 deaths or wounds a day. So the festooning of graves with wreaths and flowers was a common way for people to lament those who had been lost. It was a grieving process, not just for families, but also for the whole nation. It was a way to honor Civil War veterans, who became the largest body of veterans at that time and would continue to be honored and remembered, even being granted large pensions at the end of the 1800s for their service until the last Civil War veterans died in the 1910s and 1920s. So basically, and by the way, for those of you who are expecting me to answer questions, I will answer a few questions at the end. I'm doing a live stream lecture about about Memorial Day and its impact and its history. And if you are enjoying that, if you like learning about history of any stripe, you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing, joining, becoming a member, donating. And by the way, I am not reading anything. This is all coming from right between here, these two ears. So, but basically, and this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel and our live stream lecture, and this one is about Memorial Day, aka Decoration Day, because that's what it was known as at first throughout the 1860s. In fact, for most of the first century, Decoration Day was a day that was unofficially celebrated throughout the nation, where people would remember veterans who were lost in the Civil War. Later wars such as the Native American wars that were fought on the frontier, victims and casualties of that war, as well as the Spanish-American War, would also be remembered. And you can see here in this image, this comes from 1917, showing that different Americans of different military stripes carrying the flag to go and honor the victorious dead. The people on the right, the soldiers on the right, are armed because they are about to go fight in World War I, well, what I call World War II, but you probably know as World War I. And they and basically, this was used as a propaganda piece in 1917 to celebrate those who had gone before and encourage those who were going to fight at this point so that they would be steadfast and strong. 100,000 Americans would die, be captured, wounded, or go missing during the First World War between 1917 and 1918. About a third of how many U.S. soldiers were lost in the Civil War. By the way, I don't consider the Confederacy to be part of the United States. I say they are American casualties, but they are not the casualties of the United States, because they were at war with the United States. They had broken away from the United States to maintain their way of life, and the Union Army at first was interested in appeasing them and keeping them from attacking the capital, and eventually under Ulysses S. Grant sought to crush them and end slavery. Thanks to the Emancipation Proclamation, the war was redirected to the undergirding issue of slavery, which had obviously been its main cause, with the Confederates being worried that Lincoln would take away their slaves. But Lincoln decided with the Emancipation Proclamation to redirect the attention of the war to slavery, and that would lead to continual fighting and eventually crushing and destroying the Southern system, including its infrastructure, economies, burning its plantations and crops, and setting slaves free at a breakneck pace, which happened throughout 1864 and 1865 as the war wrapped up. So, but this piece of propaganda is to encourage soldiers going off to fight in the next major American war, World War I, while also remembering those who had gone before and honoring their graves. So you can't see it, but it says Decoration Day 1917 on it. So this celebration for the Americans was extraordinarily important. It had already become part of the annual remembrance of soldiers who were lost. This would be retroactively applied to other wars, such as the Mexican-Americans War, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812, which had gone before the Civil War. But obviously, with veterans and even their families still alive from the Civil War in World War I, it was particularly significant that America remember its veterans of the past while embracing its veterans of the present and even the future. Of course, the Second World War, aka World War III, which I call it World War III, which would lead to the deaths of over 230,000 Americans fighting in both the Pacific and in Europe and North Africa and Italy in order to free Europe from Nazi oppression and to destroy Imperial Japan. This would obviously necessitate a huge amount of casualties to do such a Herculean task, and would lead to many of them being buried in Europe, meaning that much of the land America received from Europeans was actually given for national cemeteries to be built and constructed there. But those are some of the obviously, as more wars came on, those are some of the examples of different wars leading to different numbers of victims who were then celebrated, commemorated, remembered, and lamented during Decoration Day. As people started to remember, it became more common to call it Memorial Day. Interestingly enough, just as the Decoration Day had emerged as part of a national scar from the Civil War, as the nation sought to heal itself and come back together and remember the victorious dead, whether they be Confederate or Union, which is why General Logan held that first national celebration in 1868, and why Congress had passed the National Cemeteries Act in 1867 to properly mourn, bury, and remember those who had died fighting on both sides. Obviously, the national and political and military significance of Decoration Day when it had started had been the healing of the nation and the processing of the grief of a loss of 600,000 souls in the Civil War. This was revisited, this cultural and historical context is extremely important for why Decoration Day started. But how it became Memorial Day and a national holiday also carries significant political, historical, and cultural weight and context is required. So fast forwarding, you have World War II, what I call World War III. Then you have the Korean War, and then in the 1960s, you have the Vietnam War going on. Another war that cost the lives of tens of thousands of Americans with great amount of suffering and people fighting and not knowing and families not knowing what's going on, mothers losing their sons, wives losing their husbands, and sisters losing their brothers all the time. Of course, wars nowadays include female victims and combat fighters much more so than any of the wars that I have mentioned previously. But obviously, the nation became more and more divided over the Vietnam War. The feeling of fighting in Southeastern Asia to prevent North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam and communism from rising to power obviously made many, particularly the younger generation, question why the United States was involved in a war so far away when the people of Vietnam seemed open and willing to embrace communism. The United States was not exactly respecting the democratic wishes of the Vietnamese people. The fear of communism seemingly was greater than the respect to democracy, and more young people became more and more antagonized and against the Vietnam War. So, as casualties amped up starting after America's escalation in 1965, the need to remember those who had passed away, even if a war was contentious, controversial, and becoming less and less popular, became necessary for the United States government. So it was under these auspices of not only enshrining a popular holiday that had been celebrated for nearly a century, known as Decoration or Memorial Day, but also for reminding Americans of the importance of the sacrifice of those who had fought and died, and also swelling up patriotism so they could continue the war effort successfully in Vietnam. The Johnson administration, along with the approval of Congress, officially renamed Decoration Day Memorial Day to remember those who had gone before and fought and mainly died in service of their country. And so in 1967, Decoration Day became Memorial Day. Just as it was an effort by the Americans to unburden the guilt and shame and loss that they had suffered in the Civil War, it was now a way to ramp up jingoistic patriotism to continue the fight in Vietnam, sometimes without proper questioning. As the war became more and more unpopular and controversial, however, the tens of thousands of lives lost or changed forever through injuries, mutilations, and other horrific experiences led to the war becoming more and more unpopular and eventually seemingly untenable and unwinnable. So there was a power shift in 1969 with the rise of President Nixon, who wanted the war to end with the U.S. having a dignified response to the Vietnam War, de-escalating and moving out of the war and bringing soldiers home, but withdrawing with dignity and with a sense of victory. Nixon did this through a process of Vietnamization where he tried to strengthen the South Vietnamese government to be able to stand up on its own to the North Vietnamese government. Long known for its corruption, brutality, and dictatorship, the South Vietnamese government was never well liked by its people and was only propped up by the Americans because it promised to be anti-communistic. The growing frustration by the people in South Vietnam had led to the rise of the Viet Cong, South Vietnamese fighters who were trying to make South Vietnam communist. So much of the fighting of the Vietnam War actually occurred against South Vietnamese communists who were being propped up and supported by the North Vietnamese government. Nixon took the fight to the North Vietnamese, bombing supply lines and soldier passages in North Vietnam, as well as communist allies in Cambodia and Laos. So, anyway, that was what's happening there as the Vietnamization sought to prop up the Vietnamese government, and the Americans continued to be invested in a war that was extremely unpopular, with very little end in sight, President Nixon shifted the focus of the war to withdrawing American troops while propping up the South Vietnamese government. By 1973, he believed he had succeeded in this, leading to the Paris Accords, where the United States pulled all of their forces, their military operatives, out of South Vietnam, hoping the South Vietnamese government would stand on its own. Of course, 2 years later, as many of you know, this government would fall when the North invaded and took over, and Saigon became Ho Chi Minh City. However, in 1971, continuing to hope for patriotic sympathy for the war and the efforts of the U.S. government, the Congress passed a law that was later signed by President Nixon that enshrined Memorial Day, formerly Decoration Day, as a national holiday to be celebrated on the fourth Monday of May. Therefore, trying once again to get as much patriotic fervor as this ad had done for World War I back in 1917, and as Americans have been doing ever since the holiday had emerged from those grieving the loss of such horrific amounts of life in the Civil War. So a century after it had started, it continued to be a way for Americans to look back, remember those who had passed away, memorialize them, and also celebrate America's accomplishments in war. It is a patriotic holiday, if not a bit jingoistic. However, the main intention of the war is often overlooked, as barbecues, celebrations of three-day weekends, and the hope of summer tend to obscure the sacrifices made by hundreds of thousands in order to preserve freedom or to preserve their own lives, because you're fighting for your own life when you're in the trenches. You're not fighting for ideology. The American soldiers suffered and died by the hundreds of thousands since the holiday has become part of the American cultural tradition. While that has been overlooked in many ways, Memorial Day continues on the ostensibly to be a remembrance of those who passed away and a celebration of those who fought and survived, even if they risked and gave huge amounts of themselves vis-a-vis injury, capture, torture, and all sorts of other things. So that is a basic background of the celebration of Memorial Day, better known as Decoration Day, better known as Memorial Day, started off as a celebration, memorialization and lament of Civil War soldiers, festooning their graves with decorations, normally flowers, and became a way for the United States to, on the one end, celebrate and remember those who had given their all to preserve America's strength and sovereignty, but also on the other end was a way to drum up nationalistic pride and military involvement when necessary throughout both world wars, and especially during the Vietnam War, when it was finally codified as a national holiday and given its proper name and given its proper celebration, the fourth Monday in May. So as you are celebrating or enjoying your three-day weekend, or if you're not an American and you're just learning about the history here, understand the way that this holiday was made as an original lament for what had been lost, but has also been used to drum up patriotism, to stop questioning of the American system, and also to remember those who had gone before and preserved America. There are both positive and negative elements to the traditions, histories, and roots of this holiday, as there are with almost every single holiday, and the ostensible forms of celebrations, either embracing a three-day weekend or remembering those who had fought and died for their country. Even that does not sum up the actual history, tradition, and importance of this holiday that comes right before Americans swim into their summer. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed me talking about the history of Decoration Day, Memorial Day, and its origins, where it came from, and how it is tied to the Civil War, America's bloodiest war, and how it continues to be a symbol for how Americans remember, lament, and embrace their military past, future, present, and future. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. We're about 28 minutes in, and for the next, 15 minutes or so, 18 minutes or so, I will be answering all your questions related to history and social studies. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you would like to talk about, drop that in the chat, and I will be happy to answer it regarding social studies and the like. I do this every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and my lectures are on Sundays at 4. And I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, join and become a member, donate, and help this channel grow as we continue to look for new ways to deliver history in a captivating manner, and especially a friendly neighborhood manner. Thank you so much. And I'm going to look through the chat right now, and we've got some great people here. I saw Carl in here, Vinesh, and of course, Stryker, great to see you as usual. Memorial Day in Australia. So it's interesting. Australia celebrates Memorial Day on Armistice Day, which would make sense because Australia was part of Britain, of the British Empire, and part of Britain's sphere of influence, and obviously fought and suffered and died in both world wars in the 20th century. One moment of silence. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Stryker. Stryker's always got interesting Australian history. Hello, Asif. I will take that as accomplishment. I would love to be confused for someone who is Bangladeshi, but I am not. Israel is not a terrorist state. Liam, when I look at videos of other nations online, I realize how lucky we are to stay in the West. The rest of the world is still primitive. Yeah, that's a simplistic notion. There are many incredible and wonderful places all throughout the entire world with many pluses and minuses. And what there is it's not necessarily one is better than the other, but there are trade-offs, to be sure, and there are many advantages and benefits from living in America, but there can be from the Philippines, like Carl is, or from Great Britain, like my wonderful moderator Harry is. So, let me see, just looking through the chat. Let me see. Okay. Can you talk about the Sabra and Shatala refugee camp in Lebanon in the 1980 by the IDF? No, because I don't know about it. Learn about Europe before you talk. We exist 2,000 years longer, and you are all European childs, idiot. That's funny, Wheelchair, because because I'm a European historian, and check out my videos on the Roman emperors, the British monarchs, the Russian monarchs. I've done a lot on my current series on Russian history. I've done a lot about European history and talked about its influence and everything. So, Wheelchair, once you catch up, you'll figure it out. Hello, Kai. Why does Israel occupy Palestine and the West Bank? I mean, that land has been highly contested, and obviously Israel has had an occupation. It controls many of the utilities and infrastructural systems that exist not only in the West Bank, but in Gaza. And obviously the continual worry of Israel's self-preservation and existence in the wake of different Islamic terrorist groups that want to destroy it and have no desire to allow it to exist on its own, has led Israel to decide to take those measures. In many of it. Also, there's power to be had. There's great power that comes to anyone who can control another group of people. So that's constantly quite the case. So, hello, Lava. Let me see here. Yeah. And where are my moderators? We need to hold down the chat because everyone's just saying whatever they want to say. Anyways, does anyone have any questions related to history or social studies they would like to ask? Because I'd be happy to answer them. And I'm doing this as a bonus. I just finished my live stream lecture. So people keep saying Lincoln was a Republican, but it seems he wasn't exactly aligned with Republicans as we know them now. Was there a switch party ideals at some point? A common historical theory, which I believe to be at least partially a historical myth, and I talk about historical myths on this channel. I do short content every day. Sometimes I do historical myths or did you knows or hot takes or stuff like that. But basically, a common historical myth is that the Republican and Democratic Party switched overnight in the 1960s because the Democrats decided to embrace civil rights after being opposed to it for so long, and the Republicans and all the Southern racists were so angry that they became Republicans. This was a generational and cultural trend that did not happen overnight and took years and years for the South to become solidly Republican in the United States, while New England became solidly Democratic, and that seems to be shifting even now because parties change and the demands of the nation change, and because of that, that causes the parties to change. The idea that they flipped overnight is not true, and that that Lincoln, it'd be interesting. Would Lincoln be a Republican today? He was a protectionist. Many of the ideas that the Republican Party are embracing recently may be very popular with Republicans in the late 19th century. But the common refrain and idea is because the Democratic Party has long been the party of civil rights and different achievements therein, the idea is that the Republican Party is of the 1860s would be the Democratic Party today. And I don't think there's enough evidence to say that clearly that the Republican Party of the 1860s would be either party today, but there are we have to go off of the clues that we have. Where were Jewish people in the 1800s? There were Jewish people, many of them in Eastern Europe. There were Jewish people in North Africa. There are many different types of Jews. There's Sephardim, there are Mizrahim, there are Ashkenazi. Jews are all over the place. Many Jews in the Russian Empire and Eastern Europe fled in the 1800s, some of them going back to Israel and some of them going to the United States. I don't know, Henry, about that. Pitt the Elder is obviously extraordinarily important in creating the British parliamentary system, but I think Churchill has to take it as best prime minister because of what he did in World War III. And yes, Joseph, yes, we can build it. My question is, why have Jews been kicked out of every country they've ever been in? I don't know. Why were 6 million of them killed by the Nazis? I mean, I love this. The line of questioning that actually that's used by anti-Semites on the internet all the time proves anti-Semitism. That the Jews have been kicked out of all these countries, and therefore there's something wrong with them, actually proves that there was a long trend of anti-Semitism that has worked its way down to the internet, where we can use anonymity to protect ridiculous ideas we would never try to affront in a coffee shop on a date. So, and yes, stop the war. All the wars, Lava, I agree with you. Why did Israel prop up Hamas? Why fund a terrorist group if you don't want terrorists? The funding so that was a mistake on the part of the Netanyahu administration. They were funding Hamas, giving funds to the Gazans, and the ostensible reason was to provide support that they would otherwise be criticized for not providing to the Gazans, to the Palestinians there. The less transparent reason would probably be that by allowing Hamas to continue its operations and attack Israel, they could properly destroy them, rather than going in and destroying them without a case. So October 7th provided the Israelis a reason, or perhaps an excuse, to go in and take back Gaza, which they gave up in 2005. Hamas has been in power ever since then, and the Gazans have suffered as a result of it. Not that so yeah, that's part of it too. Jews did that thing in the summer of 2001. What thing? So, and no, I am not Jewish. So I just love this. Let me see. I love the idea that I love people who assume that I am Jewish just because I simply spout historical facts. And facts are not anti-Semitic. No, they are not. And yes, indeed, Jews have been kicked out of different countries. But the reasons for that is where people who are more anti-Semitic want to imply that the reason for that must be something that's wrong with them. The Jews lost their land to the Romans because of 2 different rebellions that went awry. Actually, 3 different rebellions that went awry. Other expulsions from their lands have included under different empires that did not want them to have autonomy. So the Jews seeking their own autonomy and the ability to have their own state has led to different problems there. Logan, I didn't see your question, so please answer it again. Hi, Virginia. Let me see. Yes, thank you, Batman. I'm glad. It's always nice for people to share their views, even if I don't agree with them. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to remove your message. Let me see. So, does anyone have a question regarding history or social studies that doesn't have to do with Israel for once? Do you subscribe to the theory that the United States can be categorized as a bunch of little countries? No. There's definitely some sort of a strong level of autonomy for the individual states, but if you look at the start of American history and the Articles of Confederation in the 1780s, the United States started as the United States kind of started that way with the Articles of Confederation, but really kind of ramped up and kind of coalesced because they couldn't be unified with the founding of the country with the Constitution. Yeah, I love that false equation that being kicked out of a school when you're a child is the same as being kicked out of a nation, even the nation you lived in, which has happened several times. And yes, pickles, I do. Who doesn't like crab cakes? So, anyways, questions about history and social studies would be nice about now. We've got about 10 more minutes. How does the supposed most technologically advanced military in the world allow October 7th to happen for 6 hours? Yes, I love this. The conspiracy theory that October 7th was an inside job. Security breaches, gaps in the system, these things have all been attested to, and Israel has acknowledged that their intel and their military infrastructure failed them. What was the last war America was in that it was justified in joining? Good question, Henry. I don't know. It's hard because in justifying joining, some people would say, obviously, you can't be justified in joining any war. Justifications of war are almost more philosophical than they are historical. The last war that America was actually decently successful in achieving its objectives, and hopefully what they thought was a moral claim, was the Korean War. Social studies includes history, but it also includes civics, politics, government, all the different things that are geography. They're historical and history accessories, as Hank Hill would say. What does it mean to act ethically in politics? It means it's something that a lot of people have felt politicians haven't been able to do for a long time. It's the ability to behave in a way that benefits the population and the people that you represent, and to achieve legislation that is actually beneficial for, again, the people you represent and the people you're trying to help. I forget exactly who killed Gandhi, Logan, but Gandhi obviously is extraordinarily instrumental in India gaining its sovereignty and independence from the British through nonviolence, civil disobedience, all of those campaigns of the Indian National Congress. He inspired civil rights movements all around the world, such as anti-apartheid and the civil rights movement in the United States, but was killed. I forget who killed him. He was extremely old when he died, interestingly enough. Most of the time when someone's assassinated, they're very young. Yeah. What was the last war America was in that, oh, I already answered that. Let me see here. And the Hannibal effect afterwards with their Apaches. Yes, that is true. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not an Israel apologist. I'm a historian who deals with historical facts, and those are some historical facts, and I'm not going to ignore it. Yes, Batman, thank you. I just appreciate you sharing intolerance. It's always nice to see people sharing intolerance. Global, great to see you. Long time. And I don't know who killed. I don't remember exactly who killed Gandhi. Which U.S. president had the most underrated impact in the country and why? For me, it would either be James Monroe or William McKinley. Monroe obviously set American foreign policy with the hegemonic Monroe Doctrine. He also started America along the American system of infrastructure buildup and westward expansion. But McKinley also won the Spanish-American War at the end of the 1800s, and America got its own imperial say-so because of that. So it's interesting. The Israelis have it, and that's what keeps them from being decimated constantly. Yes, the USS Liberty. Yes, that's actually true, Batman. You are not wrong about that. You definitely have your facts straight. Your conclusions are a little wrong. Thoughts on the new Kanye West song? Yes, I've heard it. I know what it's about. It's not about what a lot of people think it's about, but obviously he's just doing things for attention at this point. It doesn't even matter anymore. It's just about trying to get as much negative attention as he possibly can do. We live in a society that is completely in love with negative attention. That's why TikTok exists. Yeah, I said it, which is weird because we probably should get a TikTok for this channel, but yes. Charles, I do. He was killed in 1991, the son of Indira Gandhi, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi, and was killed. I'm not sure exactly who was responsible for his death. Thoughts on the building a shield? Oh, I already answered that. Did North Korea send 700 troops to Burkina Faso? When? I think they did. I've heard about that. What could Obama have done differently with foreign policy? Obviously, the Arab Spring did not spring anything except more brutality, just discord and disdain throughout the world. Creating refugee crises, wars, civil wars, and all sorts of things. The idea of importing democracy and regime changes in the Middle East has never worked well for the United States, and Obama had not learned that lesson. Was the Great War a pointless war of monarchs? To some extent, Henry, it was. I don't believe what I call World War II and what you might believe to be World War I was a total waste. It obviously set up the modern world system. It created the Soviet Union. It led to the rise of the first communist state. It brought America into foreign policy from which it has not yet retreated back from. It put the United States in as probably the premier superpower, 1A and 1B, with Great Britain as its either its slight superior or slight inferior. It ended the Ottoman occupation, created the modern Middle Eastern states. It has done a huge amount. It has a huge amount of effect. I don't know if it's necessarily a war that had a point to it other than imperial expansion by the Germans, French, British, Russians, and Austro-Hungarians. So, yo, great to see you. So, Korean War is the United States. The United States won in the sense that South Korea is still is not communist and North Korea is. It was a stalemate. The North became communist, the South stayed communist. That's in the 1950s. About 25,000 Americans died, more than twice that die in the Vietnam War, where the United States failed in keeping half of the country out of communism, and Vietnam remains communist ostensibly to this day. Nafu Ram Gaudisi. Thank you, Charles. Hot dog or hamburger? Well, we're talking about Memorial Day and what we're having for barbecues. Oh boy, that's a tough one. Hot dogs probably. And sauerkraut. It's very German. Most American food is inspired by immigrant food anyways, so I'm going with the Germans. Hot dogs, wieners, and sauerkraut. Did Australia rip off England's flag in the corner? I mean, it's a British colony, and that's why it has a British-like flag, as do many of Britain's former colonies. Canada is an exception. In fact, the United States flag is more like the British flag, the Union Jack, than the Canadian flag. If you could ask one question to one historical figure, what would you ask? I would ask Napoleon why invade the Ottoman Empire. I would want to talk to Napoleon about that. I never have felt that it was a mistake to invade Russia. And yes, food is indeed a mixing bowl. And Thomas Jefferson, another great historical figure to ask a question. Do you know you are wrong? Community is important. Yeah, community is very important. Raphael, how am I a sophist? Sophists, by the way, were an ancient Greek philosophical school that was engaged in more relativistic theories and agnostic ideas than finding solid truths, and they often warred with Socrates and Plato. So I don't know exactly how I'm a sophist. But thank you, Raphael. Yeah, so. Okay, no answers. Why Pakistan supports terrorists? I have Indian friends and they told me that India has been suffering from terrorism since independence. Yes, that has been a problem. Obviously, the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, the assassination of Indira Gandhi, the assassination of Mohandas Gandhi has been a trail of that. Obviously, the Western world is extremely suspicious of Pakistan because that's where Osama bin Laden was killed, and Pakistan has had ties to radical Islamic groups and organizations in its history that have made people extraordinarily uncomfortable with supporting it or its claims on Kashmir, which is the disputed territory between India and Pakistan. Who do you think did 9/11? I tend to stick with the ostensible story there. You are item scanning apps designed to boycott Jewish. Are item scanning apps designed to boycott Jewish businesses anti-Semitic? I don't think that it's anti-Semitic to boycott. It wasn't anti-white for Rosa Parks and her followers and Martin Luther King to boycott. If you have a particular view, you are perfectly allowed to boycott something or find a system to boycott something. I don't think that's necessarily anti-Semitic. There's a big difference between saying, I won't buy this product because I have this view or that view, and saying, I won't support these people because of their race or background. So, being against the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic. Being against the Israeli people's right to exist or Jewish people in general, definitely anti-Semitic. What do you think would have happened if U.S. listened to George Washington about not starting political parties? It's almost impossible to consider a world in American history that doesn't have political parties. You would have had a uniparty system that would have had shades of meaning, like Madison envisioned in the Federalist Papers with the whole idea of factions, but it's very hard to picture it otherwise. Will one world government replace sovereign countries anytime soon? Seems like the world is actually pushing away from supranationalism and a one world government. Yeah, yes, that's incredible. Israel did the USS Liberty, therefore they did 9/11. Fascinating conclusion. Do you remember when the Palestinians in the West Bank were celebrating that there were dead Americans in the streets of New York? I mean, this goose for the gander argument is just, nobody ever applies it. You have to apply the same standards in how you treat the Palestinians as how you treat Israel, or else you will never get a two-state solution, a proper one. What's your thoughts on Israel and Hamas war? I've been asked to share them all the time. Thank you. I've never had that question before. But random Christian conservative, in all honesty, my thoughts are very simple, and I think they're very fair, and I'm just going based off of the history. Israel wins every single war it fights in this area. The war needs to end. Hamas needs to lose power. Netanyahu needs to stand for re-election, if not war crimes. I mean, he is in big trouble here. When the U.S. is starting to back off of him, that's a bad sign for Israel's geopolitical position. And there needs to be some sort of working, probably with the West Bank, on creating a proper two-state solution. A two-state solution that doesn't have terrorists who want Israel destroyed, and a two-state solution where ultra-conservative Jewish settlers are not rampaging and creating war zones in neighborhoods in the West Bank. So, yes, it's a fair idea. Don't bomb children. Don't use children as human shields. Don't hold hostages. Don't want a country destroyed. And don't take land don't be an instigator by taking land. Have you watched the documentary on Israel and Palestine? Yeah, definitely watched it plenty of times. The Antichrist will rule from Jerusalem. I've heard this before. That's just modern. It's not even ancient. It's modern Christian theological interpretations. Yes, Leona, I'm not here to defend America or Israel for that matter. But it sounds like you're just here to crap all over them. So that's the difference. Which general or leader do you think would prosper in any time frame? Patton, believe it or not, his strategy, Napoleon, Alexander, those would be my three. That's a good one. Yes. And yes, Mega, I don't know, Henry, how to say that. You know quite well about India. Had you been to India or what? No, I just love India, its history, its society, its culture, and I love the history of any area that I'm studying, and that's what we specialize here in the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Hello, JW. Yes, I do. It's called the USS Liberty. I've spoken about it on the channel many times, Leona. But thank you for sharing your perspective. My only thing about a two-state solution is Israel always accepts a deal. However, the Palestinians deny every deal they have gotten for, I believe, 5 times now. That there's some truth to that. The Israelis were willing to give 87% of the land, not just of what the Palestinians wanted of the land, but of the land to the Palestinians, and were rejected from that. Who was Schindler and why did he have a list? Thank you, Henry, for changing the subject. And this might inform some people. Schindler's List was a list, is a derivative name used for the movie that was based on Oskar Schindler, who used Jews as cheap labor in his German factories and eventually became convinced that the Nazi Party was going to exterminate Europe's Jews if he did not do something to stop it. So he used the factory system and his own wartime production needs to employ Jews and eventually to hide them and keep them from being killed, and he saved over 1,000 of them. A fascinating guy. You are too good looking for this kind of stuff. Thanks, I appreciate that. I mean, it's not bad to have someone good looking while you're doing history. What do you call, yeah. Yeah, that's funny, James. So yes. But yeah, Henry, that's the Schindler's List thing. The list was people he would save, and he saved over 1,000 of them. And there were many people like Schindler who risked their lives to save Jews from all over the world. And thank you, James, for your respect. I really appreciate it. If you respect the channel, if you respect what we're doing here, consider liking and subscribing. We are just after 4 o'clock. I'm going to wrap it up. If we have any other questions, this is now. Speak now. Forever hold your peace. Consider liking and subscribing. Even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, even if you don't like what I have to say about certain geopolitical or historical aspects, what matters is that you're here and you're engaging in the history, and that's what I really love. Charles is saying, yeah, you are right. Also a student of history. Until now, I have found that India has very diverse cultures, traditions, and languages. Absolutely. And people, and India, the idea of a monolithic Indian country is a modern creation that does not have its roots in the ancient culture and traditions of India, where religious and social class are so much more important than if you're from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. That would have been unheard of. Even India itself would have been relatively unheard of to the Indians 500 years ago. That's why Columbus didn't name the Native Americans after India. India was occasionally called that, but it was Hindustan, the land of the Hindus. Just like Afghanistan is the land of the Afghans. And yes, Tarib is correct. Like, subscribe, and share. It's that simple. And consider donating if you would like, or joining. You don't have to, obviously. Yes. Hungarian history. I'll do a little bit about that. Austro-Hungarian Empire is because Franz Joseph of Austria married the daughter of the king of Hungary and then became the king of Hungary, forming the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1868, which lasted about 50 years. Yes, Tarib, I have read that. I know what you're referring to. And thank you, Shuriken, for joining us at the very end. It's always great to see you. Yeah. Let me see here. My boys, you need to, like, calm down. You're being too loud, as Taylor Swift would say. I don't know who Simo Haya is, the Finnish sniper. It sounds fascinating. I'll have to look into him. Probably from the Winter War when Russia got its rear handed to them, very surprisingly, by the Finnish in the 1940s. Romanian history, Wallachia, Transylvania, Vlad the Impaler. I do know a little bit about that. Romania was originally Dacia. It was conquered by the Romans, and that's why the Romanians are named Romania and have a Latin-based language when all the countries around them are Cyrillic-based. So there's some stuff there. And obviously Wallachia or Transylvania was the region of Vlad Tepes, better known as Vlad the Impaler, who inspired Count Dracula. Yeah, JW, thank you for saying that. I agree with you. Absolutely. Fudge the Nazis. Okay, James, no more of those. Let's see. Why do 44% Thais in Thailand speak English? English is the most dominant language in the world when you consider that. England obviously never colonized Thailand. Thailand was one of the few countries to never be colonized, but because of the close colonization, colonial links in areas like Myanmar, India, and Malaysia, the English and British had a long-standing repertoire with the Thai people. Yeah, why does Prussia sound dealing with the Holocaust? I don't know a huge amount about those countries during the Holocaust. I know many of the Jews obviously lost their lives from those regions. Why does Prussia sound like Russia? Actually, Prussia and a lot of its region is very close to Russia, and some of it was even owned by Russia at some point. I don't know exactly where the terminology comes from, the etymology. Yes, I know Jesus spoke about that. Jesus was also a Jewish rabbi, Leona, so awkward. Putin is not only angry at the West, he's angry at Russia not being strong enough. He's like disappointed in its own way. If King Bulan was responsible for the Jewish conversion at about 900, why are today's Jews considered ethnically so? Because he wasn't. Mapuche native. No, I do not know about them, Steve. I'm going to have to learn a little bit about that. Yes, the Winter War. I think I've heard about him before. Simo Hayan. I'll have to hear about him. The Winter War was when the Soviet Union used the Allies being busy with the Nazis to invade Finland and try to bring it into the Soviet, and the Finnish beat them. Believe it or not, the Finnish beat the huge Soviet Union that was just about to beat the Nazis. The Operation Barbarossa and the invasion by the Nazis of the Soviet Union probably disabled them from actually finishing the war correctly, but the Finnish themselves finished the war with success. Hello, CB. Impact. The pact contributed the division of Europe into opposing military blocs during the Cold War, increasing tensions between East and West, played a huge role in Soviet interventions in Hungary. That's the Warsaw Pact. Is it true Thomas Edison stole his ideas? Some of them, but he had an entire factory of guys who were working with him who knew that might happen. I'm not a U.S. history professor. I'm not a history professor yet, but I will be, and I love to talk about it too. So both of it. World War III, in my opinion, is the Second World War because I believe the French-Indian or 7 Years' War is the First World War from the 1750s. Go watch my video on that, Jupiter, and you'll learn a lot there. But if you're referring to the near war that could happen, it could happen if Putin invades a NATO country, if Israel attacks Iran, the United States does not back them or does decide to back them, and if China attacks Taiwan. Those are some possibilities. Yeah, or North Korea could attack Japan. That's a possibility too. Kitty Q, hello. All right, so I went a little bit over than I expected, but it's great because we have some good vibes. We have a lot of great questions and people who, even if I don't agree with what they're saying, they still say some really interesting and fascinating things, so thank you for that. University, a bunch of stuff. My third subjective world war. Well, it's because there's the 7 Years' War where there's fighting in Europe, Africa, North America, and India. That becomes the First World War. So the Great War is the Second World War. And if you look at what the wars have in common, the Germans starting and fighting in them is something in each of them. Not for the Romans, it wasn't. If every U.S. president was put in a Royal Rumble cage match, which one would come out the victor? Theodore Roosevelt, he was a boxer. Communism is somewhat banned in Europe, although some people would disagree and think that socialism is just there to replace it. So, no storm, I think, sea kelp. All right. Jupiter, if you want me to go on, go check out my live stream lecture where I talk about this. It's from like a couple months ago, and I have a long-form video where I make the case and make the argument. But thank you, Jupiter, for egging me on. I appreciate that. You got me to go on, and I did not stumble. Indian foreign minister is very good in terms of geopolitics. You should listen to him on Trump. I probably will. Lincoln was a champion wrestler and was never defeated. So 2 of the greatest U.S. presidents were 2 of the greatest fighters. So something to say about that. But anyways, so that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't, like and subscribe before you head out, please. It helps the channel. If you want to consider donating to help the channel grow, I would really appreciate it, but no pressure, obviously. And Leonardo, blink twice if you're held hostage too. I hope that Putin isn't planning anything other than surrender. I don't know, Kitigo. It all depends, is the president in Xi Jinping's image or not? But yes. All right. Were the bankers funding the Nazis in Britain? Some of the Swiss and the Swedish probably were, but yes. All right, take care. I will see you guys for our usual live stream Q&A Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Check out my full-length video there. Go and check out my full-length video today, which is my old one about Memorial Day. I hope you guys really, really enjoy it. And again, like and subscribe. And Yana, we've already been over this. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great one and a happy Memorial Day to you as well, to you all, and for all of those of you who might have served. Thank you for your service. Take care. Have a great night.